Hello, I'm Paul Briley, and you're listening to Off the Comma. I'm a human who cares about supporting other humans. On this podcast, we'll explore all facets of what it means to feel stuck in life. We talk with people just like us who have found themselves sitting on a comma and not knowing where to go next. We'll unpack the experience with them, where they've been stuck, what it feels like, what they experienced, and what they learned. My goal is to inspire you by seeing yourself in others. I believe that when we feel more connected and seen, magic can happen. I am really excited because this week I have with me Casey Lipka, and she is a colleague of mine and someone that I've met in the past couple of years who has just really shown me another side of life on the creative side. I'm going to let her tell about herself, but I know her as an artist and as a musician, and she's so much more and so many more things, but I've really gotten to learn a little bit about the artist's life and the artist's way a little bit through Casey. So I'm excited to have her here today and to have her tell her stories and share a little bit about herself. So Casey, I'm going to hand it over to you because you know I'm a talker. Tell us a little bit about yourself. How would you like to be known and what would you like folks to know about you?
Oh, thank you so much. Such a pleasure to be here. Let's see. My name's Casey, and I am a coach. I'm a musician. I'm an artist. I'm an educator based in Sacramento, California, and Los Angeles. And that's a little bit about me.
One of the things I do, Casey, is with most of my guests, and this isn't like a test or a quiz or anything, but I love to explore because this is all about us being humans and connections to each other. And I don't want to pressure you, but I'd love to hear what adjectives might you use to describe yourself, 2 or 3 words that kind of just describe you as a human.
Ooh, what a great question. Let's see. I would go with curious, kind, and I'll stick with those, curious and kind.
Curious and kind. Okay, cool. I can't wait to hear how those show up in the stories that you tell and anything you'd like to share with us along the way about being curious and kind. I'll also acknowledge you because these are things that I know you as. So this has been my experience of you over the past couple of years that I've known you as well.
Gosh, thanks, Paul.
Casey, one of the things I do with all of my guests as we get started is I would love to hear, what would be your intention for yourself being on this podcast today? What would you like to have by the end of our conversation?
Oh, yeah. By the end of this conversation, my intention is to be authentic, exploratory, and be present.
And my intention is to hold the container for you to be able to have those things. And also, as we get into your story and your story unfolds, that there will be folks out there who hear a little bit of themselves in your story. And in doing so, that helps them feel a little bit more connected, a little less alone, and perhaps maybe even a little bit inspired and empowered based on, what your story does for them. So that's what I'm hoping to be able to help you create.
Beautiful. The power of sharing stories.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into it. I'm really excited to hear what you have to share. And as with all my guests, we haven't really talked about what your story is going to be. I like to experience it new as well. So we have 5 questions that will frame the conversation today. It's the same 5 questions. And let's start with the first of the 5 questions, and we'll kind of drill down and dig in a little bit from there. So Casey, where have you found yourself sitting on a comma in your life?
Yeah, sitting on a comma. When I think about sitting on a comma, the visual that comes to mind is kind of stuck in one place or sitting in the unknown or sitting in a place that you're kind of hanging there. You're hanging on a comma, you're in the air and immersed in space. And I feel a couple different ways about sitting on a comma. First of all, sometimes if I'm in the right headspace, sitting on a comma is kind of exciting because there is the unknown And then the reverse is true as well. When I'm sitting on a comma and I really don't want to be, it can be kind of frustrating.
Mm.
So the thing that comes to mind when you ask that question is so much of my entrepreneurial, musical, and coach journey is one of making my way through a series of commas.
Mm.
and and when I think about, yeah, when I think about being an artist and continuing to keep going, to continue to show up and be authentic, and to continue to show up as a creator, as an artist, it is, my debut EP that I released earlier this year in 2023, in the spring of 2023, was called Show Up.
Mm.
And when I think about that album and I think about the process of bringing any art to life, I think about the many challenges, the the many, I don't want to call them problems, but opportunities to make your way through seeing things in a new way. And the unexpected things that come up whenever you are striving towards anything in life, but particularly for me with that album, it was, okay, here's the recording dates. Okay, here's what I want to do to get the album out. Okay, here's the music. Okay, here's, now I want to get it out into the world. And so many things come up along the way. So many things came up for me that I wasn't expecting. And at this point in the creative process, I've been a part of many different collaborations and worked on my own music in different contexts. It's to be expected that there will be unexpected things. And when I think about sitting on a comma, I'm getting better at, I see the comma and I know that the best thing for me is to keep going. And for me, what helps me continue to move are people asking me questions, people keeping me accountable. I have a coach, I have a chief, I like to call her my chief operations manager, Gia Helwig, who I meet with weekly, who helps me keep the ball rolling. And then I have a co-working partner who I meet with, who also helps me continue to move forward, because it's easy when things are flowing and you feel the internal momentum, you happen to feel really good about something. Those are what I'm going to call the easier points. But life is life, and life will be lifing, and there will always be the times when you don't feel like doing something, and when it's harder or stuff in your life comes up. And you know for me, how can I make my way through those commas that are going to come up?
Mm.
And what infrastructure can I set in place for myself to make my way through, or to continue to keep going? Because for me, that's the most important part, to continue.
I want to reflect back some of what I hear you saying, and everyone's experience with sitting on a comma is so unique, and there are threads and themes that run through them. And this is one of the things that I really I'm so grateful for and appreciate about being able to be here in the podcast with folks like yourself, all of my guests, is because I get to hear what everyone's experiences are like. And you described this kind of sort of binary-ish relationship, but I'm going to assume it's not that simple. But let's explore the two binaries in this case, which is that sometimes it serves me and sometimes it creates certain ways of feeling for me. It can be frustrating and so forth. And the word that you used most common as you were describing sitting on a comma was unknown, and followed by uncertainty. And so you acknowledged for us that kind of they're inevitable, and that there are series of commas in our lives. I mean, just like there are in sentences. And yet sometimes when there's too many commas in a sentence, then that's an opportunity to look at that sentence, right? And maybe rethink it. So I just want to acknowledge for you this awareness of commas kind of having a place in your life, and also this really great sense of self-awareness around when I experience commas, I'm also very aware of how I react and respond to them.
Yeah. Yeah, and the way you put it, Paul, it makes me think life without commas would be quite exhausting.
Mm, yeah, that's a powerful statement.
Yeah, I've been very assured and inspired by the work philosopher. I'm calling her a philosopher, thinker, activist, Trisha Hersey,
Mhm.
and she has a book and a card deck around rest. Her book is called Rest is Resistance, and she has a rest deck, which I kind of think another way to think about a comma is about resting and taking the time you need
Mm.
to recharge and recuperate, and we all need that for our life vitality force, and to have what we need, take care of ourselves, make sure that we are charged and ready to go, and we always deserve rest for no reason at all.
Oh, I love that. That's such wise words in this world in particular. I'd love to dig a little deeper here because one of the things I like to explore here is what your experience with commas are. And you mentioned that as a musician and as an artist and also as an entrepreneur, basically, that you encounter different commas that take you into the unexpected, unknown, even when they're expected. When commas show up for you, and maybe I'm not going to say this organically here. Maybe you can look to a specific example if you'd like to share, but I'd love to hear from you when commas show up for you. What does that create? And feel free to put it in the lens of a specific example.
Yeah, well, I'll stick with the example of the EP that I released earlier this year. I For me, I'm very aware of when a comma shows up for me. Well, it shows up for me in many different places throughout a creative project. And for me, it happens, I'd say, the most and the most intensely when I first start, before I've shaped a project and I kind of know what I want it to be. I just know that I want to do something, and I'm not sure what. And this parallels my life as well. When there's something that I know there's something I want to do, but I'm not quite sure what, and it's sort of floating out in the unknown, or as you're calling it, sitting on a comma. And I think that part of the process for me creatively is challenging, because it's like I have all this energy, but I don't really know where to put it.
Mm,
And it's kind of this time of simmering in something. What is it? What is the thing? Is it um yeah, you mentioned a journey into the unknown, and sort of, I don't want to say waiting, but that's the word that comes to mind right now, waiting for the thing to emerge and speak for itself. I recall, for my first album, Show Up, my debut EP, I I really wasn't sure in the beginning. I'm like, I know that I want to do something, but I don't know what it's about. And I have a couple songs, and I want to write more music, and you know, sort of, I guess I would say, some made up rules of like, oh, it has to fit into this idea of something.
mhm.
And for a while, it was kind of sitting there floating in the universe. And thank you for deadlines, because I had a recording deadline, which means I had to write, which means I had a deadline to write music by a certain date. I personally do well with deadlines. Love-hate relationship with deadlines, but they help me get things done.
Mhm.
And, you know, at some point, because I had that outside accountability, I eventually I I found my unknown, which was for that album. It was the unknown. So there was acceptance of the comma, And my response to the comma was to keep going, which I guess we're talking about in this conversation, to show up. And the best way to keep going is to show up, take action, and be authentic. And that's what you can do. And that's what that whole album is about, being continuing to show up. And showing up is hard. Showing up is joyful. Showing up is wonderful. Showing up is brave. And you asked me, I think you asked me how do I feel in those spaces?
Kind of, yeah. What does it create? Which includes anything that comes up, right? So yeah, how does it feel? What does it create?
Yeah. I think I shared a little bit about the process of sitting on the comma and what it creates for me, which is sort of this kind of turning feeling of around the unknown. And the lesson I continue to learn over and over and over again is that take action of some kind.
Yeah.
Because taking action and showing up helps illuminate the way more than thinking about it. And that's been the best remedy to my comma, is to take action of some kind, because it gives you information.
I love that. And I hear that, especially when you talked about having outside accountability and deadlines. And two things, if I may. And again, so I'm going to propose something to you, and then you take it where you want to, because this is your platform today. But I'm really curious, because something came up for me as you were telling your story that I want to explore. I would like to explore, because I think there might be something there for other folks who are experiencing the same thing. And it tinged on my little radar as well. Let's come back to showing up for sure. But you were describing this experience of getting started, that being kind of the most challenging part. And you have all this energy, but you don't know where to put it. And then you described, I don't really know, maybe these aren't the exact words, but what I think I heard you say is, I don't really know what I want to do, or I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to be doing. And yet I'm curious, because it sounds like in order for there to have been an initial idea, there was something there. And then later you described, oh, it's sitting there in the universe. And I don't remember if you said this or not, but what I think I heard was this implied message of waiting to be revealed. And then you said, I have deadlines, I have an external accountability partner, and I found my unknown. So it's a long way of me kind of reflecting back what you said. And I wonder about other people who, whether they're artists or not, they're sitting at a desk job, or they're doing hard labor working on a roof, or whatever the case may be, and they have something they want to create for themselves, but they don't have that clarity around what it is. But the fact that they know there is something is something. I mean, it's kind of redundant. I'm going to stop rambling for a moment and put it back to you to get your reaction. But I'm just really curious about the whole, when you were getting started and there's something hanging out in the universe, but I'm not sure where to go with it. It sounds like it's there. It's just not clear.
Yeah, you're making a great point, which is there was something that called to me that I knew, okay, I want to do a project. And then, you take a stand, you make a declaration for what you want. And then it's like, oh, okay, well, I don't know what that project is. What is that thing? And, that's why I called it a series of commas, because in my experience, that's always kind of the big, oh crap, comma, which is really exciting and sometimes scary of, okay, yes, I feel energized. I want to do a project. I have a couple pieces of music. Let's go. And then you start going and you're like, I actually really don't know what I want to do, but I want to do something. You have, like you were saying, you've got something for the something, and you have little pieces, or at least I had little pieces of what I wanted. And so it takes time to figure out what the other pieces are. Where are the pieces? Are they pieces that you find from yourself? Are they pieces that you need help from other people with? Are they pieces that come from binge watching a show on Netflix? Are they pieces that come from reading inspiring books? Are they pieces that come from, a walk to the coffee shop and an engaging conversation that illuminates something you didn't even know was something that was part of what you were looking for?
Mm.
So, yeah, it's a little bit of an elusive process. Who knew the unknown would be like that?
Yeah. Well, and then here's the other thing too, and I probably could have rolled it into the other piece, but maybe it fits better here, is what I also heard you say is, for everything that you just described, the being in the unknown, the not knowing where it was going to go, the showing up and making declarations every day, the getting an accountability partner, you said the EP ended up being about that experience. So it's interesting because it's like you had to experience all of those things in order to then turn around and create an album and songs and messages and experiences to talk about that. I mean, that's really interesting, right? Like it wasn't about coming up with specific songs or something different or other. It was like you ended up building this thing that was based on the experience of building the thing.
Yeah, that felt the most authentic to me as things started to come to light, so to speak. And when I think about sitting on a comma, there's a song in my EP, it's called Lazy, and it's about intentionally sitting on a comma.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So coming back to the theme of rest and recharging, and it's about intentionally. People, I think, have a negative connotation with the word lazy, but I'm flipping it around and putting a positive spin on being lazy, that it's a great thing to give yourself space to breathe in, rest, and find your joy.
I love that, and we all know that the word lazy is a term used to keep you busy, and that it's generally not for your own benefit. So if we take we could go sideways on this one, hashtag capitalism. But if we remove that from the process and just talk about the human experience, that's what you're really focusing on: is rest, pauses, reflection are a natural part of the human experience. And I love that you shared that, because my experience was a little bit similar. Like, it's a long story and I won't get into that because today it's your episode, but the work I'm doing today is also similar in that my process became the product. Did all this just being stuck, and then went into coaching, and then now this podcast and collecting stories about people's experience with being stuck. And it was just really interesting because one day the universe put that in my head and said, these were the words that I use, but I'm not very good at getting myself unstuck, but people tell me I'm good at getting them unstuck. I was like, oh, maybe that's what I'm supposed to do. And then, people would ask me, are you an expert at getting unstuck? I'm like, oh, no, I'm an expert at being stuck. That's why I'm here. So it's like the process becomes the product. I know that's an oversimplification, but I think the message for folks in that is that sometimes the very thing that you're experiencing may be the thing that you then bring forth. It's not that you're experiencing this and you need to overcome it to do something else or otherwise. What is in your current experience that actually becomes the next step for you?
Yeah.
Or influences the next step?
Yeah.
That's kind of how I see, what you've shared with us about showing up. And as somebody who's listened to your album and been to your concerts, been influenced by that, that's how I choose to take it. What do you think? What's your reaction to that?
Well, my first reaction is that I think you might be an expert on getting unstuck. I mean, you're exploring this topic quite a bit for yourself and with others. So there's that. And in response to, what you're sharing, going through the process of, we have all got to go through our own process. And for me, it is the process of getting unstuck is a continual journey, because it's not like, okay, I did this album and now I've figured out my entire life.
Right.
Like I have the keys for all creative projects in the future, and now all my life. It doesn't work like that. I have more tools. I have some new tools to use in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some new opportunities and challenges that I have yet to face that I don't know what those will be. And so I keep thinking it's a journey. I was talking to a dear friend of mine who is about to turn 70.
Yeah.
And she was mentioning how we were talking about relationships, and she was just sharing, like, I thought I would have figured it out by now. I thought I would have figured it out. And it brings me back to, it's a journey. We acquire tools along the way, and I've got some tools right now from this album project that I can bring with me for the next creative venture. And the creative tools do help me in my life too. Who would have thought?
Yeah. Well, speaking of tools, and also an invitation to come back and revisit this concept of showing up as well, because I know how important that is for you and how much of an impact that has had for you. The third question is, what have you learned about yourself as a result of sitting on this comma or sitting on a comma? What would you share there? What have you learned about yourself? Speaking of tools.
Oh, great question. Yeah. What have I learned about myself? What have I learned about myself? I think my biggest takeaway from this, we're just kind of talking about the album project today. My biggest takeaway from that initial comma was that there is immense power, confidence, beauty in doing it, in making it past the comma to bring it to a full paragraph and period. And yeah, I feel really proud of that project. And when I look back on that, I learned that it's so important for me, and I think really for anybody, to be able to look back and say, hey, I have this chapter and I want to share it with you. It's a representation of something that I did. This is part of who I am, and it's part of something that I can share with the world, and a piece of how I think about art, and a gift for others. I think I learned that it's so much bigger than a comma, because a comma is one moment. And, there are commas, like you're saying, throughout my story of this album. And that's part of the beauty of it. And I think in the past, I might have stopped on one of those commas. And this time I am so proud to say, hey, look at all those commas. We read back through the story. I can share this story, and here's my word, here's my sentence and comma. But I have this thing to share with you. And at the end of the day, it's something that I can give to somebody else. That surprised me, that making my way through my comma is not only a gift to myself, but a gift to others.
I really love that reflection. And this is going to sound gratuitous, but that's why we're here. Because I believe that we don't always have to be telling each other what to do or giving everybody, our 5 tips or life advice. I appreciate those when they are there and helpful, but just the sharing of the stories. And we all have commas in common, right? And I mean, here you are today. I mean, not only did you share your story and your experience with your making your way through your commas in your album, but now you are here talking about it. And that is a gift, right? Because somebody out there is sitting on a comma and not sure where to go. Or as you said, they're kind of hanging out, in the universe on that comma, and they get to hear that they're not alone, right? And that this does happen. It is part of the process. It's not something to be fought all the time or at all sometimes, I'd love to, I like to drill down, because I think there is some practical wisdom in here too. You specifically said, that there's immense power and beauty in doing it, and that you're proud of that. And yet you talked about how frustrating it was along the way to be sitting on the comma, not really sure where to go next. Is there one little example that you can give us of and you can speak generically too, if it applies to multiple examples, but when you found yourself really stuck and you said, okay, I just need to do this, or I need to take a step or take action, as you've said a number of times, what was that process like for you in that moment? How do you move from that kind of uncertainty into taking action? That's the part where many of us freeze. Like, we just don't know how to do that.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to note that there have been so many commas before this album comma that I made it past to a, and sentence period that I didn't make it past the comma.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to acknowledge for myself and others that, some commas feel or seem really challenging. And sometimes, I have not made it past certain commas, and I have so many musical ideas and musical projects that I'm like, they didn't really see the light of completion because for whatever the comma reason was, it didn't make it. And so you're asking about making it through a comma, and
or that taking action piece. That's the part that's really kind of like, I think people really enjoy and benefit from hearing, like, how do you take action? If you're feeling stuck, how do you take action? I'm going to come back to this incomplete, not making it through the commas in a second, because that's something big.
Well, for me, making it to the place of taking action is, I don't know, I'm kind of laughing about it because for me personally, I no longer rely on myself and only myself to be that engine, because I am human. I'm not a machine.
Mm-hmm.
And I go through ebbs and flows in my creative process and my life process. And I know that for me, taking action means I am in community and I have accountability and I have people who love and care about me and are rooting for me. And so I think in the past, which is why I have not made it through certain commas, it's like this sort of grit and bear it, I'm going to figure this out. And that's not my style anymore. I have people that I hire or work with collaboratively that support my own action, if that makes sense. So, I mentioned I work with multiple people every week to kind of check in, people who sit with me to help take action for myself, or people that I co-work with to sit and take action for myself.
There may not be a simple answer, but what you have done is you've shifted from trying to figure out the how yourself to taking accountability partners, collaborators, like you said, paid coaches or whomever. Like, you've given us examples of how there's not just one way to do this. Like, here's what I'm hearing and taking for my own purposes is, if I'm feeling stuck and I'm coming up against that frequently, and maybe it's a pattern for me, then a pathway to working through that instead of figuring it out myself, I'm doing air quotes here, or as you said, grit and like bear through it. Take a partner, take multiple partners, delegate, or as I'd love to outsource that shit, right? Like taking action. Like, you don't have to just grind through it yourself, like take partners. And it sounds like that has served you very well. And you've given us quite a number of examples of different ways that you've done that. It sounds like that's really made a shift for you.
Yeah, for me personally, this is not everyone's style. I know I was talking to a musician and was like, oh, that would not work for me. But it really works for me, for my personality. So,
and I think that's kind of a key word and a punctuation point on that is finding what works for you, right? Which is also a part of getting off the comma. Casey, fourth question is, as you look back on what you've shared with us, what has changed for you as a result of sitting on this comma?
Ooh, what has changed for me as a result of sitting on this comma? The first thing that comes to mind is confidence.
Mm,
What's changed for me is that I am confident that I can make it through future commas. I
mm,
may not have the answers. Who knows what those commas are going to be? Are they going to be, who knows how challenging, if they're going to be challenging, if it will be a totally new feeling or another unknown. But for me, making it through this series of commas and sentence period, finishing the chapter or finishing that particular book gives me confidence and renewed vigor that in the future I can make it through and write another book, write another album, do make a podcast. That's something I've been thinking about. Put on a concert, reimagine being a producer and coach and artist. It is something that I can look back on and say, okay, I did that thing. So now what? What's this other thing that I want to do? And why couldn't I do that? If I made it through that comma, I can make it through this comma.
Well, I mean, in and of itself, you're really embodying the showing up concept, right? Because what I'm hearing you say is that you're not focused on how you're going to get through the next commas. It's just that you know that you can, and those are the tools that you're bringing with you each time. You're describing in a way. You find the right word for me, but the words that come to mind is acceptance of, embracing of, like going into relationship with the uncertainty, not fighting it.
Yeah. Yeah, we're dating now. Uncertainty and I were
Situationship, right? From situationship to
Yeah.
dating.
Yeah,
Nice.
there you go. There you
Yeah.
go.
And just showing up for it, like knowing that you can, no matter what it is. So show up for it.
Yeah. And don't go at it alone.
And don't go at it alone. That's cool. You may have already touched on this last question, but I'll ask it again so you can add to it or build on it. What does getting off the comma look like for you?
What does getting off the comma look like for me? I think a lot of things that I've already shared. Getting off the comma looks like being in collaboration. Getting off the comma means following through with your idea, even, following through your idea through the joys and triumphs and through the challenges and through again, this word uncertainty and unknown.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a future focused version of that question is, I don't know what my next comma is, but well, I kind of do. It's, another album project for me. I've got another idea. And I've got a few pieces. And here I go again. I don't know, but if anyone wants to, talk about uncertainty with me, please feel free to reach out.
Oh, do I smell a theme?
I know, right? I know, right?
Oh, but that's cool. Like I literally just got goosebumps because I'm one of those people. I'm very visual, and I'm always in the future. Sometimes to my detriment, but like that immediately just put something in front of me that I could immediately, in my mind, for my own purposes, like I could see that unfolding. I could totally see that unfolding. So that's fascinating.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Well, I've got a few pieces of music. And there's something about vulnerability in there. So that's all I've got so far.
Okay. All right. Well, there we go. Challenge laid. So let's see who accepts. And I love that. And may I add one thing also that you shared earlier that I think belongs here, but you tell me if it does or not.
Absolutely.
You said getting off the comma means collaboration, focusing on your idea all the way through the uncertainty, through all of it basically, but also being on the comma is okay too. Like you don't have to get off the comma either because there's value in being there.
Yeah, flipping the script on the comma, I think for me, I used to think about commas in a negative way. And I more and more these days, in the past couple of years, I like to think about commas differently and the gift that they can bring to my life. And what is being on the comma trying to tell me, or how is it,
Mm.
what's the value of the comma, and investigating. I almost think about the commas. I never thought about it this way, but somehow the inner critic, the comma, could be a representation of doubt or fear, or back to that word, uncertainty in the unknown. And I think really sitting with that comma, asking those unclear questions, like, oh, what am I scared of? Or what am I unsure about? Like, how do I feel about the unknown? What happens for me when I'm in the unknown? Or if I'm scared of this, what's the scariest part of it? Starting to ask this comma questions
Mm.
always is helpful, because then it becomes less of a, well, I don't know how big this comma is, but you know, asking asking questions from the comma can help illuminate the way.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And it's so powerful, right? Because when you're in the pause or you're in the uncertainty, you're in the unknown. And I've said this before on other episodes, our society has us kind of sort of trained or programmed to not be okay with that, to always be striving for and seeking and kind of fighting and struggling for getting off of the comma and getting to the other side. And you're describing not only this space of rest, and kind of other guests have said recovery or reflection, but you're saying, and it's exploration, it's inquiry, it's what can you learn about yourself while you're here. And you're sitting here as an example of that, because you said, okay, there's got to be more commas. There have been plenty of commas in the past. I no longer worry about exactly how I'm going to get through each comma. I just have the tools that I'm going to take with me to each one. I'm going to show up for it. And it sounds like that's been a direct result of the exploration and the inquiry work that you've done within your own commas.
Yeah. Yeah. What a journey. It is quite a journey.
And as you said, your friend said, at the age of 70, still saying the same thing, right? So like, why do we believe as human beings, that it's like, I'm going to figure this out, then it's all done. And as you said, and if it was all done, a life without commas would be exhausting. I love that.
Well, finishing the chapter, and there's always the next series,
Yeah.
the next part of the series to be written, because we want to hear what happens next in the story.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's hope. We're fortunate enough to have more chapters, right?
Yeah.
Casey, what would you acknowledge yourself for, having shared your story with us today?
I want to acknowledge the truth, being here, being present, and sharing the truth of what it takes to create art. And, I hope that even if someone who's listening who's not an artist hears parallels for themselves in their own life in a different way.
Definitely. And you've shared some things here that I think will definitely resonate with some folks. And I love it because it's not here's your recipe, you have to do these things. It's like, this is what my experience has been like. And I think there's going to be some things in here that people are going to be like, yeah, that really strikes a chord with me, or that rings a bell for me. So I do appreciate you showing up and being authentic and present and sharing with us. Casey, tell us, how can people find you and connect with you?
Yeah, well, I'm a musician, I'm a coach, I'm an educator. I love making music, creating music, performing music, and also supporting other people in their creative journey through coaching. And you can find me at my website, caseylipka.com, also on Instagram. My handle is Casey Lipka. And I would love to connect with you. Also on all the platforms, if you want to check out my music, take a search for Casey Lipka.
Absolutely. I highly recommend that. And they'll be able to find all of your info in the show notes. And yeah, definitely check out the music for sure. Also, Casey, I do this with every guest. It's an invitation. So part of your story and part of the space that I want to create here with this podcast is that we're sharing experiences, we're connecting. And so I invite all of my guests to be able to do some acknowledgments for anyone who is important to you in your life and that you might want to support or boost or give a voice to that might not otherwise get the attention that they deserve. So who might you acknowledge that is a creator or an individual or a cause or an organization and really give them a boost right now?
Oh, yes. A few people come to mind. Some are local Sacramento based. And the first is an organization that I recently had the privilege to connect with, the Wellspring Women's Center, who is doing fabulous work for women in Sacramento, providing resources and support. You can find more information about them if you search Wellspring Women's Center. Also, Gia Helwig, who is my chief operations manager and chief of getting shit done. She works with clients, and I benefit from her services. And so I believe you can find more information about her at giahelwig.com with 2 L's. And oh man, there was one other thing that was coming to mind.
You mentioned a couple of books that mattered to you,
yes,
and also a podcast.
Yes. Rest is Resistance by an amazing philosopher, thinker, activist, Tricia Hersey. Highly recommend checking out her book. And then one more is Clara in Midtown Sacramento. They are an arts hub and resource center. They house many different arts organizations, but they also uplift music and art education throughout the Sacramento community. And they host all sorts of events, classes there in their brick and mortar space at 24th and N.
Nice. Right here in my neighborhood. I walk or jog past them frequently. So
yeah.
And all of these and more will be in the show notes, so people can go to the show notes and click on the links and find these folks. And I hope you will check them out and support them and boost them accordingly. Casey, thank you for being here today. I know both of us had colds, and we both showed up, didn't we?
We did. Thank you so much for having me, Paul. What a pleasure to explore this topic with you, and what a gift this is for other people to hear about the many different commas that so many people have. Thank you for creating this.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. It's definitely a passion of mine. So have a wonderful rest of your week and weekend ahead, and I will personally be talking to you more beyond the podcast.
Woohoo! Take care.
What an honor it is to witness these stories from these amazing human beings, and today's guest was no exception. I invite you to think about what you learned from this conversation. What stood out for you? What challenged you? What inspired you? And I encourage you to write it down in some form of journaling and reflection. I can't tell you how magical it can be to set aside your expectations and just let your thoughts flow out of your head and onto paper. You don't have to have an agenda. You don't have to do anything with it, but you can be amazed at what comes out of your thoughts and onto paper and what that can do for you. I know freestyle journaling has been a powerful practice in my life for a very long time. You just never know what you might discover about yourself. Thank you for listening to this episode of Off the Comma. Follow me on social media at Off the Comma, and also look for upcoming workshops and events at offthecomma.com, or better yet, go to offthecomma.com and sign up for my mailing list and let me bring the news directly to you. I am passionate about keeping this podcast ad-free so that we create a safe container for people to be able to tell their stories uninterrupted by commercials and promotions. I currently cover all the production costs, and I'm happy to continue doing so. And I'm also open to and appreciative of any donations that anyone would like to contribute. This is nothing more than to be able to support the podcast and cover some of the monthly editing and producing and equipment costs costs that are associated with this podcast. So look for the donations link in the podcast descriptions wherever you find this podcast. Be sure to like this episode, follow the podcast, and more importantly, spread the good word. If you were moved by today's conversation, pass it along to someone you care about. As always, keep noticing.